This is Air Force One. Every angle of the outside has been photographed from every fence line on Earth. But despite this, the aircraft still manages to hide some of its best-kept secrets in plain sight. And it all starts with a small trash bin at the foot of the air stairs. The air stairs deploy directly from the underside of the fuselage, which means no jetway, no host country ground crew with a portable staircase, and nothing borrowed from whatever airport this happens to be. Air Force One carries its own boarding infrastructure for a reason. The plane has to be able to operate anywhere on Earth. Runways torn up by a strike the night before, hostile fields where the local ground crew can't be trusted, or remote strips that don't have a jetway in the first place. The stairs themselves are rated to hold the weight of an armed Secret Service detail and a full presidential entourage moving up them at full speed. On the way up, the fuselage passing by isn't standard 747 aluminum either. The skin and cabin behind it are sealed and pressurized to hold positive internal pressure at all times. Air constantly pushes outward through every micro gap and seam. Chemical agents, biological agents, fallout, smoke from a fire on the apron. None of it crosses into the cabin while the system is up. The plane can land on a contaminated airfield, taxi through the worst of it, and people inside keep breathing untouched air the whole time. Think of it as a submarine in the sky, completely independent of whatever is happening to the outside world. Now look closer at the cabin windows. Each one is 3 inches of multi-layered radiation-resistant paneling, engineered to block the thermal flash of a nuclear detonation at standoff distance. At 50 miles out, that flash is bright enough to cause permanent eye damage instantly. The panels on this aircraft block enough of the visible and infrared spectrum that the people inside can hold their eyes open through the event and watch what just happened to the world outside. Like a welding mask with the brightness preset for nuclear. Underneath the cabin floor and behind every bulkhead, the aircraft is wrapped in something more important than the radiation-resistant skin. 238 miles of EMP-shielded wiring runs through this airframe. Every cable, relay, and antenna is hardened against the electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear blast. That's enough shielded wire to stretch from New York City to Washington, D.C. and double back. A Faraday cage with wings. Picture wrapping the entire plane in tinfoil so thick that lightning can't find its way in. The shielding matters because of one thing. An EMP doesn't care about altitude. An EMP from a nuclear detonation at altitude saturates hundreds of miles of sky in microseconds. Every unshielded electronic system inside that radius dies at the same instant. Cockpit displays go dark, engine controls fail, and radios go silent. A commercial 747 caught in that radius becomes 850,000 pounds of aluminum brick falling out of the sky. Air Force One keeps flying, while every other airliner overhead is finished. Every system on this aircraft keeps running like nothing ever happened. Inside the airframe, 3 independent classified networks run from nose to tail. We'll get to what they actually do upstairs. Now, back to that trash bin at the bottom of the stairs. The bin isn't just there because anyone thinks a lapel pin is a bomb. Bombs get screened elsewhere by people whose entire job is bomb screening. The bin is there because a lapel pin could be something else entirely. A microscopic transmitter broadcasting position to whoever wants it. A listening device aimed at the conference room. A malware vector pointed at one of those 3 networks. Foreign intelligence services have been trying to get something past that bin for 35 years, and a handful of them have come close. Through the door at the top of the stairs, the first compartment on the right looks like a small executive lounge, but it's anything but. A couple of leather seats, neutral upholstery, a console along one wall. Nothing in the room hints at what's actually here. Pull up the upholstery on the seat closest to the bulkhead, and the seat folds out into a full surgical operating table. The console along the wall is anesthesia and an EKG. Mounted to the wall behind the seats are surgical instruments, a defibrillator, and a stocked pharmacy. The refrigerator at the back of the compartment holds type-matched plasma on a rotation that keeps it current. A board-certified surgeon flies on every presidential mission as part of the standard crew complement. The entire compartment converts into a working trauma bay in under 5 minutes. the most expensive seat upgrade in commercial aviation. The math is simple. If the president has a cardiac event 6 hours into a flight over the Pacific, the surgeon goes to work on this compartment and the aircraft holds course. The plane does not divert, it does not slow down. The operation happens at 40,000 feet while Air Force One keeps screaming toward wherever it was going. The plane never has to land for a medical emergency. 2 compartments further down the corridor sits the first 2 completely separate galleys. Walk past it, count bulkheads, and the second galley sits at the opposite end of the airframe. The 2 kitchens don't share an air supply, a water supply, or a single staff member during food prep. One kitchen running food on one side of the aircraft doesn't even know what the other is doing on the other side. If one of them gets flagged for contamination, accidentally or otherwise, the kitchen at the opposite end keeps cooking and dinner service for the full manifest doesn't pause. The same redundancy logic as the 3 classified networks, just applied to dinner. A single presidential flight can feed more than 100 people, including full state dinners en route. Every plate that comes out of those galleys is a potential attack vector. The way the Air Force handles that problem starts in a grocery store somewhere in suburban Washington at 6 o'clock in the morning. A master sergeant in civilian clothes walks into a commercial grocery store, picks the food for the next presidential trip off the regular shelves, pays cash at the register, and loads a vehicle in the parking lot. What the cashier doesn't know is that the cash they just rang up is buying tomorrow's state dinner ingredients for the President of the United States. No uniform, no insignia, no advance notice to the store. The next trip uses a different store packed the day before. The trip after that is different again. The supply chain itself is randomized, which means a hostile actor can't see the contaminated product at a predictable supplier and wait for it to find its way onto Air Force One. The food is the easiest way into the cabin. Every other security layer on this aircraft assumes hostile actors can't get a substance through the door. And the grocery rotation makes sure they can't get one onto the plate either. Family Thanksgiving with worse OPSEC than a CIA station chef. The result is that the most powerful man on Earth is eating a sandwich made from ingredients picked at random by a master sergeant in jeans who paid in cash. But that's far from the strangest thing on board. 2 compartments forward sits a room that looks like a small conference space. Wood paneling, a folded table, leather chairs around it. The compartment itself mirrors the Situation Room in the West Wing of the White House. Same encrypted video links, same secure phones, same controlled access. The bank of phones along the bulkhead is 85 telephones distributed across the 3 classified networks. That's more working landlines than most American small towns still have. Above them are at least 20 televisions for news feeds and secure video conferencing. But the screens aren't just CNN. The Air Force has been quietly modernizing the VC-25A fleet with a wideband senior leader communication upgrade. The bandwidth supports multiple simultaneous classified video streams without buffering. The president at his seat can run a War Cabinet meeting in real time. Pentagon, Strategic Command, the Situation Room in the West Wing basement. Any cabinet member on a secure terminal anywhere on Earth. Same video fidelity as if everyone were in the room together. The room is no longer just a backup. It's a situation room that happens to be moving at 570 miles per hour. Running into the bank is a direct hardened line to the United States Nuclear Command System. The president can authorize a nuclear strike from this seat. And that isn't a contingency built into the design. That's the written design requirement, which raises the obvious question. How does the receiving end know the order is real? The answer is in the president's pocket. He carries a laminated card called the Biscuit. It contains cryptographic authentication codes that rotate every 24 hours. Any order coming out of this compartment that requires military verification, especially a nuclear launch order, has to be paired with that day's Biscuit code on the receiving end. The codes are how the National Military Command Center confirms an order is actually from the president. Without the Biscuit, a perfect voice impersonation means nothing. The order doesn't authenticate. The chain doesn't act on it. The Biscuit is the difference between an order and noise. There's another quiet detail about this compartment that most viewers miss. The cockpit and the communication center sit on the upper deck of the 747. The president's office and this conference room sit on the main deck. That's not architectural, that's deliberate. The flight crew runs the airplane upstairs. The president runs the country downstairs. Authentication from this compartment to military command doesn't route through the cockpit. The pilots have no role in whether a nuclear order goes out. Two operational identities, flying machine and floating government, sharing the same hull but barely speaking to each other across the staircase. This compartment is what makes the aircraft a government rather than a vehicle. Take it out, and Air Force One is just an executive jet with unusually good security. Every system in here was built to survive 1990s era threats. The threats hunting this plane in 2026 are something else entirely. Move outside the cabin now and look at the airframe from a few hundred feet out. A man-pads launches from a rooftop 2 miles off the right wing. The plume blooms in ultraviolet, invisible to the eye, but screaming to a sensor tuned for it. Fairings around the fuselage and beneath the wings catch the signature in the first half second of motor ignition, before the missile has even cleared the launcher. What just saw it? An ANAAR-54 missile approach warning system. A 360-degree infrared and ultraviolet net watching for one specific thing: the UV signature of a rocket motor lighting off. Passive, automatic, silent. That detection feeds the turret mounted on top of the fuselage. The turret is an ALQ-204 infrared countermeasure system paired with DIRCM laser heads. DIRCM stands for Directional Infrared Countermeasures. When the AAR-54 calls a launch, the turret slews onto the missile in fractions of a second. Then it floods the seeker head with infrared energy at the exact wavelengths it's tuned to track. The seeker loses track of which heat source is the actual target. The missile steers off into empty sky and impacts nothing. The whole sequence, detection, slew, lock, jam, runs under 3 seconds every time, with no human operator in the loop. The pilots upstairs find out about it from the maintenance debrief on the next leg. The president downstairs never finds out at all. Behind the aircraft, dispenser bays handle the threats the laser can't reach. Chaff is thousands of thin metallic strips ejected into the airstream. The strips create a radar return larger than the aircraft itself and pull radar-guided weapons toward the cloud instead of the plane. Flares bloom at thousands of degrees Celsius, hotter than jet exhaust, and pull heat seekers off the engines toward the burn. From the ground at night, it looks like the most expensive sparkler in the sky. From inside the cabin, it looks like nothing. Between the laser turret and the dispensers, the suite covers almost every infrared and radar threat the Cold War produced. The combined system is what allows Air Force One to operate over hostile ground without escort fighters in close formation. The president sitting in the conference room rarely knows any of it is fired. Every component in that suite was designed from missiles from the 1980s and 1990s, subsonic threats, Cold War-era missiles that take a few seconds to reach the aircraft after launch. The threats hunting this plane in 2026 don't take 3 seconds. Some of them don't even need a missile. The auto defense suite hits a wall. The AAR-54, the ALQ-204, the chaff and flares, the entire chain was engineered around a roughly 3-second engagement window. From the moment a rocket plume blooms in the sensors to the moment a subsonic missile arrives at the aircraft, the system has about 3 seconds to detect, slew, lock, and jam. Against threats from the 1980s and 1990s, 3 seconds was generous. A hypersonic glide vehicle changes the number. These weapons travel above Mach 5, roughly a mile per second of closure rate. The same engagement that used to take 3 seconds now takes 0.4. The AAR-54 can still detect the launch, but the countermeasures can't complete a response cycle in 0.4 seconds. The laser turret can't finish slewing. The flare can't bloom. The math that the suite was built around no longer works against the threat the suite is now facing. Like a fire alarm built around the assumption that smoke will rise in a building where the fire shows up in the ceiling already. The harder problem isn't physical at all. Inside the conference room, those same 3 networks are also targets. The Air Force runs a program called Hack the Air Force that invites authorized hackers from 26 countries to probe military digital systems for vulnerabilities. One round of the program turned up 106 critical flaws across Air Force digital infrastructure. The Air Force paid out roughly $104,000 in bounties and patched the holes the hackers turned in. The flaws that get reported are the ones found by hackers who get paid for reporting them. Every assumption about those 3 networks being isolated, encrypted, and hostile-proof was written before state-sponsored hackers got as good as they are today. The doors that the trash bin at the bottom of the air stairs was designed to close, microscopic transmitters, listening devices, are no longer the most efficient way in. The most efficient way in is now the president himself. AI can now fake a sitting president clean enough that nobody can tell. The face on the screen, the voice on the audio channel, the cadence behind both. Indistinguishable from the real commander-in-chief on a normal display. Drop that footage into the encrypted channel of an American military command at the moment Air Force One's communications are jammed or degraded. What reaches American officers on the receiving end looks like the real president giving a real order. The order is fabricated, the face is fabricated, and the voice is fabricated. What the Foreign Service drafting the spoof doesn't know is that the officer on the receiving end never authenticates on voice. They authenticate on a laminated card the president hasn't taken out of his pocket all flight. The verification chain on this aircraft has to defeat all of it inside the minute it takes the fake to reach its destination. Whoever wrote the verification protocols on Air Force One did it back when the only way to fake a president was an impersonator with a phone and a decent voice. The new problem is that the fake can be the president himself on the receiving end. Pixel perfect and pitch perfect. The legacy chain wasn't designed for that. Forgery in the area when nobody can tell forged paper from real paper. Except the forgery this time is a human being's face and voice. So how does this aircraft defeat that? 2 ways. One prevents the clone from being made in the first place. The other defeats the clone if it ever gets made. The prevention starts the moment anyone boards. Every camera, every microphone, every recording device aboard Air Force One is controlled by the White House Communications Agency, the WHCA, the agency that runs every line of presidential communication on ground and in the air. Phones the press pool carries get screened at the air stairs. Cameras the photographers use get government-issued or government-approved. Audio recording near the conference room compartment is acoustically blocked at the bulkhead. The press cabin sits at the rear of the aircraft on a deliberately separate communications loop, far enough from the president's spaces that high-fidelity microphones won't pull clean audio from his voice from across the cabin. None of the recording equipment that AI training pipelines actually need to clone a person ever gets close enough to the president aboard this aircraft to capture clean material. The trash bin at the bottom of the stairs handles the obvious infiltration vectors. WHCA handles everything inside the aircraft from there. The defeat of the clone happens on the receiving end, and the biscuit is the centerpiece. Voice was never the authorization for this aircraft. It never could be. The cryptographic codes the president carries in his pocket are what authenticate any order coming out of this compartment. A perfect deepfake of the president's face and voice without that day's matching biscuit code is just a video. It doesn't authenticate. The National Military Command Center cross-checks every order purporting to come from the president against the biscuit. No match, no authorization. The chain of command doesn't act on voice. It acts on crypto. The perfect AI clone of the commander-in-chief calling for a strike on Pyongyang gets exactly nowhere without the laminated card sitting in the president's jacket pocket 40,000 feet in the air. The deepfake threat is real. The verification chain that defeats it was already running before anyone in the AI industry built the first convincing face swap, which is why this plane never flies anywhere alone. 2 miles behind every overseas presidential flight, a second Boeing 747 holds formation in the dark, outside the line of sight of anyone watching the lead aircraft from the ground. The crew on that second plane is at their consoles the whole flight. They're not standing by, they're on duty, with cleared lines to Strategic Command. They're ready to take control of the American nuclear arsenal in real time the moment the lead aircraft goes silent. The airframe is the same generation Boeing 747-200 as the current Air Force One. It's older than most of the people flying it. Bulge on top of the forward fuselage, the one that doesn't belong on a passenger 747, is the dead giveaway. That aircraft is an E-4B Night Watch. It's the airborne backup for the entire United States nuclear command structure. built to survive a nuclear war and continue commanding the American nuclear arsenal from the sky after the ground-based command bunkers are gone. Inside, the cockpit navigates without GPS and communicates through nuclear interference that would saturate any normal radio frequency. Through the rear of the aircraft, a wire antenna spools out on a very low-frequency reel. VLF is the only band that punches through ocean water deep enough to reach a hidden ballistic missile submarine 600 feet below. From the same cockpit, the crew can issue ICBM launch commands directly, a flying strategic command center, designed to keep running on a day when nothing on the ground is running anymore. Which brings us back to the most photographed plane in the world. Except Air Force One isn't actually a plane. It's actually a radio call sign. The 747 only becomes Air Force One the moment the president steps aboard. The same airframe sitting at Andrews tonight without him in it is just SAM 28000 Special Air Mission, tail number 28000. If the president climbs into Air Force C-32 next week, that smaller 757 will be Air Force One. If he ever takes an F-15 in an emergency evacuation, that fighter is Air Force One. The rule was written in 1953. President Eisenhower's Columbine II nearly collided mid-flight with an Eastern Airlines plane that shared the same call sign, Flight 8610. The pilots of Flight 8610 had no idea they had just put the President of the United States 200 feet from a mid-air collision over upstate New York. The Secret Service demanded a unique designation that civilian traffic couldn't identically match. Air Force One was born, not as a plane, but as a phrase the FAA and military radio operators would treat as the most important call sign in the sky. If you enjoyed this, now watch how the president gets around on the ground. Bye for now.